Today I'm going to briefly review the top 8 deck lists from the Latin American International Championships that occurred this past weekend. There were 1,263 Masters, and notably this was the first tournament the Paradox Rift was legal for in the standard format. I'll be making some more edited content about this tournament and the results in the coming weeks, but I wanted to talk about the top 8 placements and the deck lists here. Also noting, of course, take a look at the top 16 deck lists. So if you look at the top 8 and you see Mew VMAX wasn't in there, Charizard wasn't in there, Chien-Pao Excalibur wasn't in there. Well, if you just look a couple placements below, we have 9th place Mew, 11th and 12th, same 60 of Charizard Pidgeot. We have Chien-Pao Excalibur 14th. Very, very, very thin margins at this level of competition between making it to top 8, winning the event, maybe just bubbling out at 9th place. So, definitely take into consideration, those 9th through 16th placements. The decks in top 8 are not the only good decks. The decks in top 16 are not the only tournament viable decks or good decks. So definitely keep that in mind. Don't be too discouraged if the deck you're playing isn't here. Definitely use your own results in practice. If you're beating all of these decks when they're being piloted well with the deck you're playing, then the deck you're playing sounds pretty good, and you should listen to your own practice results and testing results, and yeah, use that to inform your preparation for tournaments and your deck choice. And yeah, before we get into reviewing this, of course, remember to subscribe to the channel. I think like 70 or 80% of you guys typically that view these videos aren't subscribed. Just helps you see my videos more often if you enjoy the content. And you can find ways to save money while buying products that you're probably already going to purchase, like pre-orders for new sets and singles, and even some cool collector's items over at pokecollect.com, potownstore.com, where you can buy Pokemon TCG Live code cards. DragonShield.com for Dragon Shield sleeves. You need sleeves to play in tournaments. And of course, IntoTheAM.com, where you can shop for comfortable and passionate clothing. You can find coupon codes and affiliate links down below for all of those sites, as well as a link to TCGBulk.com if you're like me and you have piles and piles of bulk cards lying around from the past couple of years of sets. You can find reliable buyers on TCGBulk.com to sell your Pokemon card bulk to. And yeah, any other links, everything's in the description down below. And let's get into this. So we'll start with Jeremy Gibson's Gardevoir at 8th place. Now, Jeremy and Kieran played one card different in their deck lists. I forget exactly what it is, but we'll find out when we look at Kieran's. So we'll open this up as an image and take a look. So both Jeremy and Kieran in the top 8 did go with the no battle VIP pass version of Guardy. They're really the same deck if you play VIP or not VIP. You just have a little bit, you kind of place your power level and consistency in different places when using the Battle VIP or the not Battle VIP. So I won't talk too much more on that. Like, just because I've done well in online tournaments, I'm not going to have a bias towards the VIP pass. I'm going to, play what I think is actually best for any given event and tell people to play what I think is best for any given event. And the Battle VIP Pass version is probably going to be better for the next couple weeks moving forward because it's easier to help you stabilize against decks like the Iron Valiant EX decks and against aggressive decks like Miraidon. But at the end of the day, those matchups are still going to come down to, most of the time, how aggressive could the opponent be. Just the Battle VIP Pass version will sometimes let you outlast that aggression a little easier than the non-Battle VIP Pass version will. But in a list like this with 4 Ultra Ball, you're going to more consistently be finding your Gardevoirs, whichever one of those it is. And you also have the option to play Lumineon V in here, so Kieran and Jeremy played one Lumineon V and that Avery. So the Avery is very important in the mirror match and also against Chien-Pao. So which is why I would have played 2 if I was competing in LAIC this past weekend, and why a lot of people played 2 or even 3 Avery. But the idea here is that you could play 1 Avery, since you really just want to play it on like turn 2 against Chi and Pal and the Mirror, and sometimes against Mew, maybe make them lose a Genesect. But you don't really need to play Avery successive times. It's great if you can, but a lot of times it's unnecessary. So having the Luminion that you can guarantee the Avery exactly when you need it, but can also get an Iono, a Research, a Boss, a Tauros when you need it as well. Typically not for a Worker, because if you're using Worker, it's going to typically be to remove Path of the Peak, so Luminion won't help you there. But instead of bumping up the supporter count of Avery or Boss or Tauros, playing the Luminion V makes sense, since you're still playing the Collapse to get rid of the fish, and you can also use Tauros to get rid of it. Uh, they're both playing 2 Counter Catcher. Now, talking about the list jogged my memory. Kieran just ran 4 of the Teleportation Burst Ralts, whereas Jeremy ran 3 and then the 1 Memory Skip. The Memory Skip is just worse against Control, pretty much, because if they Erica's a Ralts out of your hand, you can just Teleportation Burst it back to the bench and send up something that can attack next turn, so forcing them to use a Counter Catcher or another Erica's or an Echoing Horn Boss or something. So that was the one change. They just wanted Kieran played 4 T-Burst, and Jeremy played 3, and then the 1 Memory Skip. Something else to talk about here is that they are not playing Luxurious Cape, but they are playing Zacian V, and I saw that across many Gardevoir lists from the weekend. The Zacian V is a little more reliable, but also, I believe, a little bit more of a risk. The other thing that it's good at is it can be an attacker that is not part of your Gardevoir line. So when attacking with like a Gardevoir with Shining Arcana to use the Brainwave attack, you use that attack, it can do the same amount of damage as Zacian a lot of the times, but then when it gets KO'd back, you lose a Gardevoir. So the Zacian, although it's a 2-prize attacker, you're not losing a Gardevoir when you use it, and it can also reach higher amounts of damage a little bit easier, since the Gardevoir will need the Luxurious Cape. So I believe that players this weekend were kind of choosing between Zacian V or Luxurious Cape, although I did see some players using both. We'll see here in the list that got 3rd and 8th, they were playing Zacian V with no Luxurious Cape. Playing Cresselia and Manaphy, no Jirachi. I kind of think that you either play Cresselia or Jirachi. Now, of course, there were people that played both, and that's fine because they can both get value. But when trying to make the most efficient use of the deck space for Gardevoir, because there are so many good cards you could put into this deck, and you only have room for 60 cards. And then you have some cards you have to play. Like, you need to play 10 Psychic Energy. Some people try to get away with 9. I think it's pretty across the board now to play 2 reversals. And of course, you have your whole Gardevoir line. You have the Ninja, the Manaphy, the Ionos, a couple of stadiums, a couple extra stadium outs, enough ball search, some rare candy, some super rod. There's so many cards that you have to play in the deck for it to function and be good and be feasible into the meta, that you don't really have a lot of room to work with playing something, in my opinion, like Cresselia and Jirachi, because the Jirachi is going to help you against Sableye Lost Mine. It can also help you against Yoga Loop, but it doesn't protect the active against Yoga Loop, so they can work around that a lot of the time. Whereas Cresselia is also going to help you against Lost Mine, and it's also a pretty good attacker into the mirror matches. Screamtail's typically going to be a more efficient attacker into the mirror match, but if they have Manaphy but not Jirachi, then that's your cue to use Cresselia. So I think I would have went with Cresselia this weekend as well over Jirachi. There's not enough of a dominance from Lost Zone Box to make me want to put Jirachi back in the deck just yet, although Lost Zone Box surely isn't dead. It is definitely still on the map. Moving on to, we'll cover all of the Gardevoirs. So next was 6th place Gardevoir Matthew Burris from Australia. Now, Maddie B here was playing the 4-battle VIP pass, and you'll also see some of the other things I was talking about with Jeremy and Kieran's list. They're playing Cresselia, but not Jirachi. They're playing Zacian V and not Luxurious Cape. Um, Here they've kind of, I think, dropped the worker in favor of Lost Vacuum. They're also not playing Pal Pad. The Lost Vacuum makes sense to me. It was another card that I was talking about with some people for LAIC, notably Jeremy Lim from Australia was also playing he was playing a no battle VIP pass, but we were talking about, do we cut the worker for vacuum? Just seemed like it would get a lot of value this weekend because Charizard lists were adding Vengeful Punch to help against Guardy. There's always chance for cards like that and Panic Mask and things when the metagame is expecting and preparing for Gardevoir EX. But other than the difference of, this deck's playing Battle VIP Pass and then a couple less ball search cards, um, not too many things different to note. Like I also mentioned, two Avery, no fish, which is fine, as is one fish in Avery, but they definitely have different pros and cons to them. Whereas the Lumineon can guarantee that you find that Avery, and the double Avery is going to help you naturally draw into it more, but it's not an exact search out for it. Although with the fish, which is an exact search out for it, you are often going to end up leaving a two prize liability on the bench. In some matches, you care about that more than others. And then we'll just quickly here look at Kieran's list, which, as I mentioned, was 59 of the 60 same cards that Jeremy played. He just played a fourth teleportation burst Ralts instead of the memory skip. Next would be Keto's Snorlax Control. So Snorlax Control did make it into top 8. And we'll see here is the 0 energy build of Snorlax Block Control. Not playing the Crabominable with the 1 water energy. This deck plays just a ton of supporter cards, and I can briefly go over why the supporter cards that are in here are in here. Typically, there's just so many bases to cover with control, so you want to try to cover everything since you don't really need many supporters to function with your deck. You're just trying to set up a bunch of Snorlaxes and eventually control your opponent to a point where they can't play the game. So, of course, the main strategy is going to be Snorlax with the block ability that says that your opponent can't retreat as long as it's in the active position. I don't think the Mimikyu is very good because most decks have ways through the Mimikyu safeguard. The Pidgeot V is just so even if you run out of resources, you could just keep putting it back into your deck and not deck out. And the Rotom V helps you draw cards throughout the game, especially in the early game. Then at some point you could just pick it up so it's not a boss target for the opponent to get Snorlax out of the active. Erica's Invitation's very important to the deck because you can get a Pokemon out of your opponent's hand onto the bench and into the active, all in the use of one card. Misfortune Sisters is really great for decks with high item counts, so it can get rid of their switch, their escape rope, cross switchers, all those kinds of things. Really good for getting rid of Pal Pad against Gardevoir so they can't Pal Pad back their Toro and their boss. Penny, of course, is going to be a staple to the deck so that you can pick up your damaged Snorlaxes. And as I mentioned, you can also pick up Rotop V after it has served its purpose. The Snorlax with Bravery Charm is 200 HP, and that's going to be hard for a lot of decks to knock out, Snorlax after Snorlax after Snorlax. Um, there are a lot of decks with very, very high damage outputs, but not all of them are going to be able to stream successive attacks against the Snorlax, especially when you're wasting their resources with Erika's and Echoing Horn and Boss's Orders and Counter Catcher, bringing up Pokemon and trying to trap them into the active. This deck also has Giacomo to remove special energies, Sydney to discard those special energies and tools and stadiums from the opponent's hand, Avery to maybe make room on your opponent's bench so that you can then Erika's or Echoing Horn things onto their bench that they don't want to have on the bench. And yeah, it's just really a war of attrition until you run your opponent out of resources, and you win by trapping a Pokemon that can't do meaningful attacks in the active, or your opponent can take 6 prize cards even though you're trying to disrupt them. Number 5, the fifth place deck list was Brennan with Lost Zone Toolbox, and this really isn't Sablezard to me because it's very heavy Mirage Gate for Mirage Gate, which that's typically not how Sablezard plays. Also, only one Lost Vacuum. Again, Sablezard will typically be very, very high in the Lost Vacuum count, so you can try to turbo into your Sableye attacking. But what's different about this deck, like I mentioned, they're playing 4 Mirage Gate. That's not the norm for Sablezard. But also, Roaring Moon EX is one of their main Mirage Gate targets. Of course, your Radiant Charizard can also be attacking earlier than usual because of all these Mirage Gates. But the Roaring Moon EX, this was actually Roaring Moon's highest placement in the Masters Division. Very strong attack, whether you just need to output 220 damage or you need an instant KO effect. Roaring Moon EX can offer both of those, and that's why we have a heavy count of Mirage Gate in here, also so that you can attack aggressively with the Radiant Charizard. I know a lot of people were saying it going into this event that Radiant Charizard's just a very good attacker, very efficient single prizer. It can respond to a Roaring Moon. It can respond to an Iron Hands. It can pretty much respond to any of the faster threats in the metagame while being a single prizer, and while you don't really have to worry too much about Lost City because that's been pretty rare to see in the current standard format. So Lost City's Radiant Charizard's biggest weakness, because you typically want to chain attacking with Radiant Charizard as much as possible with the help of Clara and Super Rod. So I think this was a great tournament for Radiant Charizard in general. And yeah, I don't know that I would play this Lost Zone box deck exactly the way Brennan did, but it worked for him to get to top 8. And yeah, very good strategy of just 4 Mirage Gates so you can power up Radiant Charizard very early, and then you can finish out the game with your other attackers as well. And then the Roaring Moon EX to just clean up any kind of knockout you need. Then we have top 4, Lost Zone Giratina made it into the top 4. Now, I know a lot of people asked about the Forest Seal Stone, and it really does make sense. I mean, this isn't something new. We've seen Forest Seal Stone in Lost Zone Giratina deck lists, whether it's from Japan and people just disregard it as a weird idea from a Japanese tournament, or I've also seen it shared from players in the West and they're just discounted and told that it's bad. So, here's a lesson to learn. Most of the time, cards and ideas and strategies are not objectively good or bad. Sometimes they just need to wait for the right time, or you need to get a little bit luckier with some ideas, or some ideas are more have more niche uses. Forest Seal Stone and Giratina V-Star would definitely fall under niche uses. It's good in any matchup where you don't attack with Giratina V-Star. When you're just attacking with Giratina V for the shred attack, like in Lost Zone box matchups and like versus Snorlax control, which Giratina V-Star versus Snorlax control was streamed for the top 8 match of this tournament, because you won't be using your Star Requiem against these decks mentioned, and Forest Seal Stone will actually allow you to get that V-Star power value in this game, whether it's to find a switching card you need or just your first Colress for the game. I don't think the Forest Seal Stone's a bad idea at all. Also, do note here that they did not play any Iono, just the 2 Roxanne, and lowered down to a count of just 1 boss so that you could play the 2 Counter Catcher now, which I think Counter Catcher really good for this deck. The only deck that it benefited more than Tina is likely Gardevoir EX. Then, of course, we have Noah Sawyer's Entei v Iron Valiant EX deck. Very well built deck list here. I know that the people who played this deck over the weekend were saying that Technical Machine De-Evolution did not get a lot of value, but I think other than that, everything here is very sound. The 2 double turbos, a lot of the Entei v Iron Valiant EX deck lists we had seen the past few weeks from Japan or from content creators. I know Azul covered it. Grant Manley wrote an article on the deck. I had actually recorded material to make a video on this, but then other videos just superseded it in priority, so it never got out. Yeah, and I definitely thought this was the best discovered way to play Iron Valiant EX going into the event, and then we didn't see any other new ways to play Iron Valiant EX, so it might just be the best way, because Entei V is such an efficient attacker, outputting 220 damage very easily on turn 1 if your opponent plays a full bench. Even if they don't, you're still putting out 2 shots against everything. With the help of Magma Basin, you don't need a supporter to accelerate the energy to NTV, and it also encourages, playing a very frivolous game with like researches and squawk ability to dump some fire energies. You don't need a lot of resources to get the attacks off with NTV, and switching also works very well with the Magma Basin strategy. So the switching also obviously works very well with Iron Valiant EX to get your Tachyon bits working, and then playing the 2 Forest Seal Stone and 2 double turbo energy, as well as, like I said, the aggressive draw engine of Squawkabilly and Research and Colus's Experiment to try to get into those double turbos as often as possible when they are situationally needed in the early turns, especially. As the game goes on, it's probably a little easier to find them, or maybe attach an extra energy for turn to Metacham V when an Entei V isn't KO'd. But yeah, very aggressive deck, and also puts out pretty efficient damage even against decks that don't fall to its aggression. What I liked about this deck in testing a few weeks back was that it felt fine against Roaring Moon EX, whereas every other Iron Valiant EX deck felt awful against Roaring Moon EX and other aggressive decks of the like, such as like Miraidon. Of course, Iron Valiant Rapid Strike was fine against Miraidon because of type advantage, but as far as strategy of the deck, aggressive big basics were seeming like an issue for most Iron Valiant EX variants that were popping up, and NTV helps you get over that, because even if you're not hitting every Pokemon for a one-hit knockout with NTV, you can always clean that up with Tachyon Bits and Yoga Loop later, and then you also have Radiant Charizard, which swings for 250. As I said, very good, very good attacker in this format. I think I might have misspoken and said that Brennan's Lost Box deck was the highest placing deck with Radiant Charizard in it. If I did, I apologize, because of course we have Noah's deck list here with Radiant Charizard and Metacham V. I think I also had seen some lists prior playing either Radiant Charizard or Metacham V in this deck list, but I definitely think they both can fit in here harmoniously, as we see here with Noah Sawyer's deck list. Definitely think this deck could have taken the whole event for sure if there was a unfortunate situation in the finals where Noah, I believe, had retreated twice. The judges didn't catch it until they were too late. So that was unfortunate that we have those resources put into the stream and table judges watching one specific game, the biggest game of the tournament, and then it was ruined by something that neither player caught and neither of the judges caught either. And Noah did get a double prize penalty for that. And of course, the winner of the tournament was Miraidon EX, taking down another major event. I mean, we got to put some respect on this archetype, because it's won major Champions Leagues in Japan, it's won regionals in North America, and now it wins the Latin American International Championships. And it's not even all because of Iron Hands EX. Iron Hands EX is a one-off card in here, and you have the double turbo energy to support it. Really, this is not a deck built around Iron Hands EX. If we go real quickly and look at Anil's 13th place Miraidon deck list. Now, this is a deck built around Iron Hands EX. This I would almost call an Iron Hands deck list. It's playing 18 Lightning Energies, it's playing Raihan, it's playing Peony, it's playing 2 Iron Hands EX. Many noticeable differences from your typical Miraidon Flaffy deck, but this is just a deck that has an Iron Hands EX in it. And Miraidon EX was already very good. Iron Hands EX is just one more tool on top of all of what it already had. Mew EX, Raikou V, Flaffy, Raichu V, Zapdos, and Zeraora. Of course, Electric Generator. Arvin, which fits really well with the deck because it's always a search out for electric generator or one of your tools. So Miraidon EX, again, proving it's a very strong and consistent archetype. It's also not as punishing on misplays, and oftentimes you'll be working a little less harder than your opponents will be against decks like Lost Zone, against decks like Gardevoir, even against like the Iron Valiant deck with a lot of sequencing and retreating and switching. Miraidon EX, a little bit simple, but very, very strong. Proven again here with the Latin American International Championships results. So those are the top 8 deck lists. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more Pokemon TCG content. Check out ways you can support the channel and save yourself some money at some great websites down below. And I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.